Hello, it's Janello. On this week's episode, we are talking all about dry January. We are sitting in my home bar, the Lit Snail, and clearly you can see we have a bunch of alcohol in this bar. But we have some alternatives to alcohol also. So today I thought I would do this in 3 parts. 1, what is dry January? Alternatives to alcohol, when you want to have the experience of a drink, but you don't want the ill effects of that drink. And then thirdly, how I personally deal with alcohol, my consumption of it, my relationship with it. It's something I call drink like an Italian, but we'll get into that. Let's jump into the video. What first got me curious about this whole dry January thing and people's relationship with alcohol is that I started to see a bunch of non-alcoholic spirits, beverages, and even bars pop up. And I got interested in why is this happening? Why is this happening now? And more so, has this ever happened before? Before we get too deep into this, a couple of quick disclosures. This video is not meant to be a definitive guide to how to deal with alcohol. Everybody's different. Everybody deals with alcohol differently, both genetically, chemically, behaviorally, and psychologically. Also, I'm not discounting any of the programs that have been in place to help people who are truly addicted and have a really, really difficult time with this substance. I'm also not going to get into the genetic side and the sort of neuroscience part of what alcohol does to the body, although I will touch on it briefly, but that's not really what this video is about. It's more for me to just talk about how I kind of deal with alcohol myself, and maybe that's something that you can relate to, or there's something in there that you can take away to help you on your journey to be sober curious, or dry January, or sober October, whatever it is the thing that you may be trying to do and change about your relationship with alcohol. So to talk about alcohol, we have to go back. We kind of have to go way back. We're going to start back in medieval times in Europe. The drinking water was not very good. There were plagues, as you probably know, and people were getting sick from drinking the water. So to combat this, one of the things that they did was they fermented things and made ale and made cider and made mead, which were all alcoholic, but it didn't get people sick. So they would drink alcohol to not get sick, and in fact, there were some health benefits to that fermentation process that were giving them nutrients that they weren't getting. Drinking was almost a necessity because it kept you alive. Jump a couple hundred years to the late 18th century, and people drank for 3 reasons. 1, they still drank for health. It was not uncommon for someone to wake up and have a shot of bitters first thing in the morning. The reason why they did this was because bitters were originally created by pharmacists. They helped you with all sorts of ailments and disorders that you had. After your shot of bitters, you would go on to work, and there was a thing called the 11s, which was a work break, kind of like our coffee break that we have now, although that was done with alcohol, not with coffee, because there weren't really coffee houses yet. There was a couple other times during the day that you would drink for social reasons or professional reasons, and then at the end of the day, you would have what they called the binge, where you would go to the public house, meet up with some of your colleagues, some of your friends, or some of your family, and drink there. So the second reason is really because it was a social experience and part of hanging out with people that you liked and winding down from the day was drinking a couple of pints or a little bit of spirits. And the third reason that people drank was because it helped with anxiety. Anxiety was running pretty high at the end of the 18th century because there was political unrest and there was a lot of problems in the country, not unlike what's happening right now. This carried into the 19th century, but it's when the first of 4 major non-alcohol, non-drinking moments happened in our history. The first was the temperance movement, which many of us have never heard of. Basically, what the temperance movement was something that Calvinists really started. So it had a root in religion as an alternative to drinking. Also, women were really huge in making the temperance movement something in that up until this point, women didn't really have a place to go. They didn't go to the pub. The temperance movement allowed for temperance bars. Sound familiar? Non-alcoholic bars were places that women, children, and men could all go. Religion was said to be an alternative to the feelings that alcohol gave you, and it did the same things. So it fostered community like you had at the pub. It relieved anxiety because you were praying and you were being abolished of your sins and things that worried you. And so it played really well to get a certain group of people to give up the drinking and adopt the religion. The next major moment is 1919, which you know very well as Prohibition. Now, Prohibition was a giant failure because not only did people not stop drinking because of that, they just kind of went underground and started bootlegging, but also it was a terrible idea because the government lost all this money in taxes. And so really what came out of Prohibition was it's better to control the substance that everybody wants than to make it illegal because they're going to find ways to do it anyway. Also sounds pretty familiar to today. The third moment was in 2014, which was the birth of Dry January by a woman named Emily Robinson. A few years earlier, in 2011, she decided to run a marathon, and that marathon was in February, and so she decided in January to abstain from alcohol because she thought it was going to help her run better. But by 2014, she took Dry January public, and other people started to take interest in this. The first year, I think there was a couple thousand people that participated, but a few years later, there was over 4 million people participating in Dry January. Mostly in Europe, but it started to make its way over to the United States. And the last moment is kind of where we are right now. In 2019, Ruby Warrington published a book called Sober Curious, urging you to reevaluate your relationship with alcohol. But it's another way of saying temperance movement or Dry January. Now that you have the background on not only Dry January, but other recent moments in history that tried to slow or stop the drinking of alcohol, let's talk about some alternatives. And mainly I'm going to talk about spirit alternatives. There are non-alcoholic wines that are done in a different way than how they used to be made. I haven't actually tried any yet, but that's next on my list. So there are a ton of new non-alcoholic spirit brands that have popped up. I have two of them here. The first one I want to talk about is Lyre's. Now, before we talk about Lyre's, let's talk about Campari. So Campari is an aperitivo that has a fairly low alcohol content by volume. Around a 24%. That's fairly low, especially when you mix it into a drink, but there's still alcohol in that. To keep it completely alcohol-free, Lyre's, which has a pretty extensive line of non-alcoholic spirits, mimicking everything from Campari to gin to, I think they even maybe do a bourbon or a scotch. You could make your Campari and soda with Lyre's Italian Orange, which is the same flavor profile as Campari, but doesn't contain any alcohol at all. So this is the zero proof version of Campari. Now let's talk about gin. 47% alcohol. An alternative to that is Monday Gin. Now Monday is a zero proof botanical beverage that is really gin replacement. There's a lot of evergreen flavors in this. I've had it on several occasions during January. It does have a lot of those stereotypical gin botanical notes that you want in a gin. Making this as a gin and tonic, you make it the same way you'd make a regular gin and tonic. I generally do 1 part gin and 2 parts tonic, add a lime at the end, and you're off to a beautiful evening of cocktails, non-alcoholic style. And you may notice that the Alt Gin and the Alt Campari are 2/3 of the way to a Negroni. The only thing that you're missing is the sweet vermouth, and Lyre's happens to do a sweet vermouth 0 proof, which means that you could still have yourself a non-alcoholic Negroni, which is on the stronger side of beverages that you get in a cocktail lounge, without it being alcoholic at all. And there are tons more non-alcoholic brands that are out there. I feel like another one pops up every single day, mimicking some part of a spirit or a cocktail that you would actually mix. There's a bunch out there that mimic like a Manhattan completely, but there's no alcohol in it. Now, why would you do this? That's the question that people ask the most when I tell them that I'm drinking these products. So why would you just not drink? And that comes down to experience. Half, if not more, of drinking is about the experience you're having while you're drinking. Just so happens that the alcohol in what you're drinking alters your body, your behavior, your mind, and all these things. And as the night goes on, that could be good.
Or that could be bad.
And if you want it not to be bad, and you know that it typically is, this alternative allows you to have that experience without the ill effects. And that brings us to part 3, my personal relationship or philosophy on alcohol and consumption. Part of the reason why I made this video was because over the pandemic, I found myself drinking a lot more than I used to. But I don't drink that much in the first place. That's why I call it drink like an Italian. Now, of course, I'm Italian American, and so I've been raised to drink like an Italian. But what does that mean? The culture that you're raised in has a lot to do with how you drink or the relationship you have with alcohol. A study was done a few years ago comparing 2 different cultures, Irish and Italians. It found that Italians drink more times a week on average than Irish. The difference is the Irish, when they do drink, they binge drink. And the Italians, when they drink, they don't. There's a couple other factors involved there, like the drinking age in Ireland is 18. The drinking age in Italy is 16. Another difference is that Italians go to an eating establishment to drink. The Irish go to a drinking establishment to eat. And there's something to be said about that. I personally grew up with a bottle of wine on the table, and I can remember being 16 years old, 15 years old, and having a little bit of wine with my meal. My dad had this thing that he would tell us all the time when we were kids, which was everything in moderation. See, his philosophy aligns with drink like an Italian in that if you do anything in moderation, it will be okay. It's the excessiveness that winds up hurting you. I thought to better explain drink like an Italian, let's break down a typical Italian evening. It starts early with an aperitivo. As I mentioned earlier, Campari is an aperitivo, the drink, but aperitivo is also the name of the hour that precedes dinner. This aperitivo hour has a bunch of snacks with it and a bunch of low alcohol drinks. Sure, you could get a Negroni, but you're still only sipping on a drink or 2 in this hour before you sit down for your meal. The aperitivo is really meant to sort of open up your stomach, as they say, and slowly move into your evening meal. When they sit down for dinner, there's multiple courses. So they'll start with some appetizers and they'll pair wine with each of these courses. So you may start out with a white and move into reds, or you may start out with a lighter red and move into a heavier red. But you won't find an Italian drinking a cocktail during the meal. Likewise, you won't see an Italian drinking a lot of wine before the pasta course, which is next after the appetizer. The revelry of the wine goes on as they move into secondi or entrees, which is usually a meat or fish dish. And then, of course, they'll get into dolce or dessert, where they'll typically have a break, where they'll have a coffee drink there instead of an alcoholic beverage. And then lastly, they arrive at digestive. And digestives are typically an amaro or something that's botanical and herbaceous like that helps settle your stomach. Also, these are low in alcohol and they sip on them. You see, the whole idea of the evening is based around who you're with and what you're doing and talking about, and less about the alcohol being the star. So the next time you're in Italy or Bensonhurst or near some Italians, take notice, and I think you'll see what I mean by drink like an Italian. I guess in a lot of ways I eat and hang out like an Italian, and that has kept my relationship with alcohol in a pretty good place. Although this pandemic has increased my amount of drinking, and so these non-alcoholic alternatives have really been great to keep that experience of drinking without drinking alcohol every night. I hope you learned something, or this is just generally entertaining for you. If it was, give me a thumbs up, click subscribe, hit the bell, do all those things so that more people can see this video. And please do leave me a comment or a question below. I'd love to continue this conversation. In fact, I loved researching this video so much that I think I may do a follow-up or two. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you want to know more about. It is February, so dry January is officially over. But if I could leave you with one thought, obviously it's going to be continue the rest of 2021 drinking like an Italian. And I'll see you next week on another episode.